here today to join us for this very important event, the launch of the Shifting the Balance report. I'm Lena Nahlus from Diversity Arts Australia, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and to pay our respects to elders, and my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and also to extend that respect to First Nations people who are here today. I'd also like to acknowledge that this sovereign land was never ceded, something that I loved hearing at the symposium earlier this year, and I think it's a really important thing to remind ourselves of. I'd like to start by introducing you to Wurundjeri Elder Aunty Diane Kerr, OAM, to the stage. What I've done is I've put everyone's extended bios. She's brought her own fan club. She's pretty awesome. Aunty Di has actually got the most amazing and impressive kind of CV/bio, and so I really recommend that you have a read of it on our website. I've got a really shortened version here, which is that she's made a lifelong contribution to her community in the areas of health, welfare, education and land rights. Aunty Di is the matriarch of her family and takes pride in being a mum, a stepmom, a foster mum, an auntie and a grandmother. So welcome to the stage, Aunty Di.
Thank you very much. I have to change that now because I'm a great nan now. Okay, I'm a great nan. In December, pretty exciting stuff. I honour my ancestors and my elders, and I pay homage to the sacred ground that we're on. I wish to acknowledge all elders and elders of different nations that are here, in the Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples, First Nations peoples from across the waters. I acknowledge you all, and I pay my respects to your ancestors and elders. It's an honour to be here on your journey, and it's a privilege to be able to share your journey. This area here is part of the traditional country of my grandmother, mother and family, and I'm always very proud to be able to do a welcome on their behalf. I'm the oldest in our family line. I don't have any generations above me. So I had to take on my eldership approximately 30 years ago, so I became a young elder. Unfortunately, my generation are the elders of the Wurundjeri people. We only have about 3 in their 70s and about 1 in their 80s. But we're very strong and resilient, and this area here is very special to us. Just down the hill there at Dights Falls is our initiation grounds. So here is very sacred. In Abbotsford Convent is a little bit different, but we're changing that. We had family here, and there was extended family here for the women, and they suffered. And it wasn't a very nice place. Some people enjoyed it, a lot of people didn't. That's why they have a memorial going here, and they have a statue for the stolen generations. But coming here was a little bit hard for the Wurundjeri people. But in saying that, our journey has been really solid, and with the convent, and we've been able to reconcile. Nearly all of the buildings here have been smoked, and people have truly shown us that we are respected as the first peoples of this country. And it's pretty amazing, you know. We all walk together, but sometimes when we go out of a room together, we're not together anymore. And I'm glad that you're doing this report, because we have a lot of Indigenous artists that are not recognised, and they're very, very, very talented, and I have the pleasure of knowing a lot of them, and I'm in awe of any artist, but I'm in awe of our artists. And I wish I was clever, you know. I wish I could do what they do. They tell stories, and they tell stories in a different way. And they tell stories that need to be told, because our stories, unfortunately, haven't been told. And we're in the era now where we can have a voice. You know, my grandmother was born on Corranderk Mission, which is up in Hillsville. It's only two generations ago for me, not long ago. And she didn't have a voice. But now, Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander peoples have a voice, and we can use it. And using it in the arts area, I think, is the best way to do it. People come, people see, people feel, people hear, and they go home and think, and they tell other people, and they share that story. It's amazing. And I went and saw the Adam Woods film the other week. I found that amazing. But I also knew that story. I didn't need to see that film to know that story. But other people need to see that film to know that story. So I'm glad that he did that. I'm really proud of him. I know him personally, and he's a wonderful man. So think about law of country. Think about this country as in here. Because we walk on traditional country every day. And the country we walk on actually has Aboriginal law before mainstream law. Our law is not to harm the land or the waters, and not to harm any of Bunja's children. And Bunja's my creator. It's about respecting each other, respecting country, and looking after our future leaders. We do that every day, but we do that without thinking about Aboriginal law. We need to bring that back, because we worry about the wider law, but we don't worry about Indigenous law. So I hope you think about that. I hope you think about walking on my ancestors' footprints. I ask you to tread lightly on this country and respect it. I ask you to respect each other so that we all walk together. We need to share our stories so that we do truly understand each other. I firmly believe if we can understand each other, we can eradicate racism. So I offer you my hand in friendship so we can all journey together. May Bunjil, my creator, surround you all and keep you safe on country. On behalf of my elders and ancestors, I say Womanjika, Wurundjeri Ballot, Niman Gundibig. That means welcome to the traditional country of the Wurundjeri people. I wish to welcome you from the tops of the trees to the roots in the ground. So when we look after each other and we look after country, country truly looks after us. Nungajin. Thank you.
Thank you, Aunty Di, for that really warm welcome and for reminding us of the land on which we are on today and that history of that land, not a necessarily easy history, and reminding us, thank you. Aunty Di has a board meeting now next door, so that was really wonderful. And you know, part of the reason that we're here today is kind of also referring to what Aunty Di was saying in terms of the importance of arts and culture in kind of connecting with people and people kind of very viscerally experiencing arts and giving them kind of enabling them to reflect upon things in ways that other things don't always enable people. So I wanted to just give you now, do a little bit of housekeeping and give you a bit of a context for this research and report. We've invited some people from across the sector to respond to the report and to give short responses. But first of all, I wanted to just let you know, for those of you who don't know, Diversity Arts Australia, or DARTS for short, is Australia's national voice for the cultural, creative and linguistic diversity in the arts, screen and creative sectors. Even though our dedicated focus is on cultural, creative and linguistic diversity, or in plain speak, in working for and with artists from non-Anglo or non-Anglo migrant and refugee backgrounds, we also work in partnership and solidarity with other communities and movements, and we're doing this with the Fair Play Project. Our work is underpinned by a human rights ethic, social justice principles, and a commitment to the ethos that creative expression and active participation are fundamental to a democratic, inclusive, and sustainable creative sector and society. So it's within this context that we undertook research for the Shifting the Balance report to identify, highlight and address inequities within the cultural sector for people who are from culturally and linguistically diverse, immigrant and refugee backgrounds. And we've had so many discussions about how problematic all of those terms are and how we're choosing to use them with that acknowledgement, and definitely using them, not using them uncritically. So today we've intentionally linked the launch of this report to the Fair Play Project, which is an access and equity project that DARTS is running over 2 years with Victorian organisations and supported by Creative Victoria. Fair Play's focus is on increasing First Nations, people with disability and CALD participation across the creative industries. So I wanted to briefly introduce now our Fair Play team who are here today. So if you could identify yourselves in some way. Mahla Karamian, Yubi Lee, Margaret Mayhew, and Paula Aboud, who is, I think, out the back working on her masterclass notes as we speak. And so later, Jane Crawley from Creative Victoria will announce the 10 successful organisations for year 1 of the Fair Play Project. Now, in terms of other housekeeping matters, at DARTS we like to document absolutely everything, to share the conversations in rooms like this with people who can't make it to the room, so that we can broaden and deepen participation and conversations. So we're live streaming this event. Hi live stream people. I know that we've got people from Brisbane today, from New South Wales and from WA so far. And we'll be audio-visually recording this event and using these recordings to make shareable content such as films and podcasts. We've also engaged 2 Victorian writers to be our citizen journalists today and to record and reflect on today's gathering. They are Hua Pham and C.B. Mako, and you can read more about them on our website. So I've put everyone's bios on our website. If you don't want to be photographed, filmed or recorded, please let Maylee Hunt know. Maylee is there. Or put a yellow sticker on your collar so that we can identify you in the photos and videos. And now the really exciting part, in case of fire, the fire emergency meeting point is at the pay station within the car park, and the disabled toilets are outside the door on the right-hand side. Other toilets are also out on the right-hand side. I also wanted to thank Neil, our Auslan interpreter today, Neil Phipps, and also to let you know that our other Auslan interpreter had to cancel. So midway through, Neil will have a break. So that means we'll have a portion of this event where we won't have Auslan interpreting. But thank you so much, Neil, for being here. Okay, so we're here today to launch a very significant report. And I feel like I kind of got my notes a little bit mixed up, so you kind of have to please bear with me. So a very, very significant and exciting report called Shifting the Balance. And before I go into that, I should say that I forgot to kind of acknowledge all of our wonderful guest speakers. So I got my notes a little bit backwards, but I'll do that next. So Shifting the Balance, Cultural Diversity and Leadership within the Australian Arts, Screen and Creative Sectors. It's the first Australian report of its kind. It measured levels of representation of culturally and linguistically diverse Australians in leadership positions within 200 of Australia's major arts, screen and cultural organisations. It included 1,980 board chairs and members, chief executive officers, creative directors, senior executives and award panel judges from major cultural organisations, government bodies and awards panels. So why focus on leadership? Because leaders have power to make decisions. The sound's kind of going, so I'm worried about the live stream people. Sorry, the sound's cutting out a little. Is it the battery? Okay. Okay, so why focus on leadership? Because, as I said, leaders have power to make decisions, to set priorities and agendas, and to act as gatekeepers. And when you don't have leaders from diverse backgrounds, this is more often than not reflected in the programming, employment, casting, and ultimately the audiences and participants of organisations. This can also be reflected in the kinds of work that gets made or shown and the artists that get supported. While we recognise that there are a range of other urgent concerns to report on and measure, this research is a critical starting point and gives people the evidence they need to work towards change. And we do need this evidence. I was telling a story about being told that I didn't have evidence that there was a lack of diversity in the arts, and certainly not enough evidence to put forward a panel proposal for a large major conference a few years ago. And we also recognise that there's a lot of other urgent concerns to report on and measure, but still feel that this is a critical starting point to start at that kind of leadership level. According to the Australian Human Rights Commission, around 39% of us are from cowled or migrant backgrounds, so first, second or third generation, or people who identify with non-Anglo ancestries. So, and this doesn't include people who identify as First Nations, because they're separate in the report and the research. Yet despite this really high figure of 39%, the research found that there was a significant underrepresentation of people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds in every art form area of the creative sector. Approximately half of all major cultural organisations had no cultural and linguistic representation at the leadership levels. Only 9% of almost 2,000 leaders of leading cultural organisations are culturally and linguistically diverse. And culturally and linguistically diverse Australians are underrepresented at the leadership level of every cultural or art form area in Australia. I won't talk too much about our findings because this is what we've asked our amazing lineup of speakers to respond to. But what I want to highlight is the importance of having baseline data, and that was one of our key aims, to establish baseline data against which the sector can measure its progress against. And we started this with Deakin University many years ago and developed a tool that's been redeveloped, and a shortened version is on our website if you want to check it out. My cynical kind of arts worker self might say, we already know this stuff. Like, really? You want us to do this research? Just have a look around. But we know the way the system works. We need evidence-based data to progress us to the next stage of working towards substantive change. We also make some recommendations in this report. In particular, we believe that funding needs to be tied to diversity, access and inclusion targets, that there needs to be a strong policy in this area, and that we need, or even an arts policy at all, and that we need to also create pathways for people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds to participate in leadership roles. There are more key recommendations, and I invite you to look at these in the report. Our commitment at Diversity Arts is to make sure these recommendations leave the pages of this report and are acted upon. We can only do this through partnerships, collaboration and support across all and with all parts of the sector. There were some challenges when we did this research. In particular, there was a lot of resistance from individuals in positions of power who didn't want this research to go ahead. Really surprising. It actually surprised us as well. In order to make change happen, we need to sometimes build relationships with those who are hostile to change, and sometimes that's hidden and other times it's explicit. So I really wanted to acknowledge and thank those organisations who trusted us with their data and actively contributed to inaugurating change. I want to acknowledge the partners. I particularly want to thank our co-authors and our partners, Western Sydney University and BYP Group, for partnering with us on this, and particularly Jackie Bailey and Professor James Avanatakis. James is also the chair of DARTS and is currently in Wyoming and sends his apologies. This research couldn't have been possible without a small but significant grant from the Australian National Commission for UNESCO, so we'd also like to thank them, and also the generosity of our research reference group, Dr. Christina Ho from the University of Technology, Sydney, Caitlin Vaughan from the Australia Council for the Arts, and Caitlin specifically asked me to give the apologies of the Australia Council team. She said, we've had a pretty big week this week, which most of us in the small to medium sector are aware of. Also to acknowledge Dr. Jack Sonis and Alex Norman from Western Sydney University, and of course to thank our event partner, the Convent, and all of the amazing speakers who we're going to hear from shortly. So firstly, I want to introduce you to the amazing speaker who is going to launch this report, Beverley Wang. Beverley Wang is a journalist, speaker and co-host of ABC RN's pop culture show Stop Everything. Beverley's journalism experience ranges from print and wire service reporting to radio producing, presenting and podcasting. She is a former executive producer of RN Drive and the creator and host of It's Not a Race, a popular ABC podcast about race, racism and identity. And I want another season, just saying. Originally, Beverley's from Canada and she's been based in Melbourne since 2009. Just want to welcome you to the stage and thank you for being here today, Beverley.
Thank you, Lena, for that introduction, and I also want to thank Aunty Diane who gave those wonderful words earlier. And hello, how are you? I'm delighted to be here to help launch Diversity Arts Australia's illuminating a new report, Shifting the Balance, Cultural Diversity in Australian Arts, Media and Creative Sectors. And I really want to thank Lena for extending this invitation to me and give a big congratulations to DARTS and your research partners, Western Sydney University and BYP Group, because you are the ones who've actually done the hard work, and you've done the outreach and the surveys, you've crunched the numbers, and you are providing a foundation on which to lobby for better policies and build even more complex research, and to actually change the face of leadership in these sectors. That is a huge effort and a massive investment in our future, so thank you so much. Now, there is a popular saying among those of us who champion representation that you cannot be what you cannot see. And if you have leafed through this report, you know that we absolutely cannot see enough diversity in the leadership of our arts, media, and creative organizations. What we can see very clearly, though, is the necessity of this research and its findings and recommendations. So thank you, DARTS, for shining this light and for all your work in this space. So, as Lena mentioned, in 2017, I made 2 seasons of a podcast called It's Not a Race. And among my goals were to bring the authority and the stories of people of color to the center, as well as Indigenous people, and assess the state of conversations that we were having in Australia when it came to race and identity and that very evergreen subject of racism. Now, needless to say, it's very fertile territory and there's never a shortage of content there to mine. In my current show, Stop Everything, we try to tackle conversations on race, representation, and diversity, which is a word that I have a very ambivalent relationship with, through the prism of popular culture. So when Lena's invitation landed in my inbox, she asked me to share a few thoughts on my own experience navigating the media landscape in Australia. And for some reason, the anecdote that I can't let go of, and which I have chosen to share with you on this auspicious occasion, is of a brush with Australian media superstardom that I had a couple of weeks ago as I prepared to go on air with Stop Everything. And no, I'm not talking about Benjamin Waltz and the Dragon Law. I'm not talking about him. So, before I go on air, I like to stay hydrated. Keep it from going going dry. So as usual, a few minutes before going live, I went over to the studio next door where there's a water cooler to fill my cup. And as usual, there were many guests in that waiting area milling around, waiting to go on air for other programs. So as I kind of stepped my way carefully through the crowd, I noticed in passing that one of the men that I was kind of weaving around carefully was none other than former breakfast television host, Carl Stefanovic. Carl Stefanovic, a flashy guy, in the very drab brown and orange upholstered corridors of the ABC. A very dissonant moment of recognition to see him in his modest surrounds, if you can imagine. But there he was, in the flesh. So that was the extent of our interaction. Didn't speak to him, we didn't even touch, right? I literally stepped around him to get to a cup of water, and I'm quite sure he didn't notice me at all. And I'm quite sure he didn't expect any mention in the speech today either. But the fact that we skimmed orbits in that moment really made me reflect on my completely unforeseen and unpredictable path in the media since arriving in Australia 10 years ago. How is it that me, an immigrant, an Asian woman with a suspiciously American-sounding accent, I'm from Canada, who showed up in 2009 with 2 suitcases, no job prospects, no connections, not an inkling of an idea of how to get into this very alien-looking Australian media landscape. How is it that I, in 2019, would be in a position where, on my way to fill my cup of water, I would brush past an actual, real, tabloid-famous TV presenter like Carl Stefanovic, on my way to co-present my own national radio show? But I thought about it, and really, despite our very obvious differences, Carl Stefanovic and I have a lot in common. We are industry colleagues, which is a strange revelation for me to realize as well, but it's the truth. We both occupy specific places along this very peculiar spectrum of Australian media diversity. Life is very strange sometimes, and that was one of those moments where I had that revelation. So there are so many high-profile white men in Australian media. They're on television, they're on radio, they're online, they're in print, they work for commercial and publicly funded media. I am one of only a few visible women of color in the national media, and I'm a migrant, and I share my hour once a week with another person. So, as I reflect further, it also occurs to me that during 10 years working in Australian media, I have only ever had 2 executive leaders identify as coming from a culturally and linguistically diverse background. And one of them was Michelle Guthrie, former managing director of the ABC. And we all saw, as covered in the media, how her time at the national broadcaster ended very abruptly and in a devastating fashion. If I move down the food chain, the only other time I have ever had an executive producer from a quote-unquote culturally and linguistically diverse background was during season 2 of It's Not a Race, so maybe 12 minutes. That's not a great strike rate at all, considering I've worked across 3 radio networks and 7 programs, but it is better than 0. So when I read in the Shifting the Balance report that culturally and linguistically diverse Australians are underrepresented at the leadership level of every cultural sector, I was disturbed because the numbers delineate the problem very starkly. But I was not surprised because I see it every day in my own industry. We are distressingly out of balance on this front. In fact, I would say there's no balance at all. We are actually just disproportionately outweighed. And as Lena pointed out, CALD Australians are 39% of the population. And yet, according to this report, just over half, 51% of the 200 major cultural organizations included in this survey had no culturally and linguistically diverse representation at the leadership level. That is 0. 0, think about that. That means at museums, performing arts organizations, music, opera, screen, and radio organizations across this country, there are no creative directors, senior executives, CEOs, awards judges, board members, board chairs, and deputy chairs. Think about all of those boardroom tables without a single seat to represent 39% of the population. That's a shock. So we need numbers to tip the scales, and we're not even there. And this problem is particularly grave when you consider how broadly, culturally, and linguistically diverse is defined. This is an umbrella term, and I'm glad to see that in this report, Diversity Arts Australia acknowledges the problematic nature of this term while it's necessary. So this is how the ABS defines culturally and linguistically diverse. First, second, or third generation migrants or members of ethnic communities. This includes Australian-born people who may self-identify or engage with the languages, customs, or cultural specificities of ancestral heritage that differ from those of Anglo-Australians. So, from the outset, first of all, we're all defined in opposition to Anglo-Australia. And if I'm understanding this correctly, that means third-generation Australians of non-Anglo-European descent, still white people, are included under this umbrella term. That is very, very inclusive, and yet the numbers are so low. And this brings me back to my friend, Karl Stefanovic, who is third-generation Serbian-Australian on his father's side, and therefore, just like me, a proudly, culturally, and linguistically diverse individual representing in the national media. And think about it, we have so much in common, right? Because I'm sure when people look at Karl Stefanovic, they are thinking, wow, get a load of his diversity. Very impressive. Look, I may be making a massive assumption here, but surely the goal of this report and all the work around it is not to advocate for more wealthy, white male, heterosexual, cisgender leaders within the arts, screen, and creative sectors. I really hope so. And I'm not saying any of this to paint a target on poor old Karl's back. His ears must be burning right now. He is simply, despite his notoriety, an innocent, anecdotal bystander in this context. And absolutely, this is a starting point. So there's no critique of darts here for choosing to look at CLD because we need to start somewhere. Because if you think about it, what would these numbers look like if we tighten the focus to first generation and foreign-born non-Anglo-Australians, South and East Asians, African people, Muslim, Arab, Central and Latin American, the diaspora, look at disability, look at class, look at migration status. I strongly suspect that we would see numbers approaching zero. It would be very stark. So I really encourage all the leaders across the Australian arts, screen and creative sectors and creative sector public agencies, whether you yourself are culturally and linguistically diverse or not, to look at the numbers in this report and, like me, be disturbed but not discouraged. Be challenged and activated and be reflective. Have those hard conversations and set goals and take risks and appoint new gatekeepers. If you leave this event today with the resolve to put these changes in place and support their retention, we're on a positive path. Because shifting this balance is well within your power, and the health of these industries depend on it. So that's all I've got to say, and please consider this report officially launched. Thank you.
Related almost. It's crazy. Thank you. That was fantastic. That was just, that was just so powerful. And you know, when you were saying if you can't see it, you can't be it. One of the stories that a young African woman told us was that her father discouraged her from becoming an actor because people like her were never seen on screen. So I think that's very true, and I think that's the same with leadership roles. And I see a lot of people will say to me, but it's because migrants are settling or they want better paid work. And I'd say, really? Like, even third generation migrants? You know, like, there's got to be some other systemic issues there that we're dealing with rather than, just the individuals. Okay, and thank you for that. Isn't it amazing, everyone? Okay, so I wanted to now ask Rohini Kappadath to and introduce Rohini. So as I said, you'll get a full version of Beverley's bio on diversityarts.org.au website and everybody's bios. So Rohini Kappadath is on the executive leadership team at Museums Victoria and is the General Manager of the Immigration Museum. She's also, I like this bit of your CV, so I kind of put this in because I'm a mum too and I think I should add something. No, this is very cool. Rohini is a mother of 3 children and with an enduring commitment to family, painting and influencing global change. I think that's just awesome. And so Rohini is going to respond to the report. Welcome.
Well, good morning everyone, and thank you Lena for that very kind introduction and for inviting me to speak here today. And Beverley, your talk was just outstanding. I'm waiting to hear it again on the recording. To begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I recognise the rich, powerful and enduring culture of all of Australia's First Peoples and pay respects to the elders, past, present and emerging. The Shifting the Balance report is both timely and essential if Australia is to move forward in addressing the underrepresentation of culturally and linguistically diverse people within our arts, screen and creative sectors. Greater diversity means richer, more authentic, culturally nuanced and meaningful arts and cultural experiences, coupled with a shared sense of belonging for everybody. We will all agree there is a fundamental gap between the rhetoric supporting cultural diversity and the reality of cultural leadership in Australia. And this is particularly significant given arts participation among culturally diverse populations is really high, especially when compared to the broader population. I thought Professor Tim Sudfumasane makes an acutely apt remark in the report when he said that we tell ourselves all the time that Australia is a multicultural success story, but the story is not yet complete. This report does an important job of holding up a cultural mirror to the arts in Australia. And my hope is that the leadership and organisations across Australia take a good long hard look at this cultural mirror and commit to change. And in this change, we want to see more diversity and wider reflection reflected back at us. I'd like to commend Diversity Arts Australia and its collaborators, the BYP Group, Western Sydney University and the Australian Commission for UNESCO for undertaking this important report. This report gives us the baseline data enabling us to better identify and address barriers to inclusion and participation. And as you've all heard this morning, that one of the major findings notes that approximately half of the major cultural organisations surveyed had no full representation at the leadership level. In my own sector, museums and heritage organisations, these statistics are even less. Only 36% have called representation at the leadership level. The impact of underrepresentation of called Australians in our nation's leadership and cultural life means that there are still Australians who visit our museums, art galleries, theatres and cinemas who don't see their own stories. And these Australians don't feel included and they don't feel visible. And what a missed opportunity that is for a country that considers itself to be a multicultural success story. And clearly there is much room for improvement. Structural barriers must come down and cultural blind spots must be removed. We cannot sit back and wait for it to happen. Action is required and it is needed now. Overcoming the findings of Shifting the Balance is not only important for the communities who find themselves excluded, it should also be important to those missing out on the voices, ideas and perspectives that these communities have to offer, as their inclusion naturally leads to new ways of thinking and new outcomes. And we all know there's growing evidence in the business sector that diverse workforces benefit from increased innovation, which improves their competitive edge. So Shifting the Balance puts forward 7 recommendations which are crucial to ensuring that we have systemic change, and I encourage you to read them carefully. It is easy for corporate and cultural leaders to pledge their commitment to diversity, equality and inclusion, but they need a way to transform their pledges into action. On reflecting on my own experiences as a called leader, I believe systemic change comes from promoting best practice models of organizational change, building a high-performance organizational culture that values the innovation and creative energy brought by diverse mindsets, with community engagement at its core. At Immigration Museum, we undertook an agenda to become more of, by, and for all by joining a global movement based on the premise that if you want to be for your whole community, you have to be representative of them and co-created by them. This is a project started by Nina Simon at the Museum of Art and History in Santa Cruz for museums around the globe to become more of, by, and for all in their communities. And we're part of the first founding wave. If people don't see themselves as part of your work, they won't see your work as an essential part of their lives. It's a very simple premise. Achieving equal representation requires multiple approaches, like new policy frameworks, capacity building initiatives, economic investment, recruiting and retention efforts, and leveraging institutional influence to inform public opinion and policy. Minimum diversity standards, mandatory reporting on called participation, government funding contingent on compliance can also be and should be in the solutions mix. Cultural institutions today face a need to address social issues as a core part of their work. As leaders, it is our role to recognize and call out institutional barriers that are embedded within decision-making processes and funding constraints that make inclusive practices harder to sustain. Cultural institutions have significant assets and power and can therefore play a critical role in contributing to systemic change that allow everyone to participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. And at the Immigration Museum, we address issues of social justice, identity, belonging, and inclusion each and every day in our exhibitions, public programs, and education sessions. We have a proud history of 20 years in which we have collaborated with over 80 communities across Victoria. We reflect diverse perspectives through community engagement and collaboration. And we're still looking at how we can better collaborate with communities in order to better connect with our diverse audiences. We're developing more experiences under a co-creation model, and this involves the museum staff working collaboratively with producers, artists, and collectives from diverse backgrounds through direct empowerment and the sharing of research and expertise. In the last 18 months alone, we've co-curated with creative producers from the African, Turkish, Ukrainian, Lebanese, Indian, Jewish, Muslim, and other communities. And recently we presented an award-winning exhibition, Love, which explored this most universal of emotions across not only ethnicity and cultural background, but also time, gender, age, sexual orientation, and distance. The team collaborated with families from Vietnamese, Cypriot, English, South Sudanese, Indian, and Congolese migrant backgrounds, as well as Wurundjeri, Muti, Appalach, and Gabalbara First Peoples community individuals, and other First Nation storytellers of New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, and South African heritage. While it's never possible to represent every cultural group, our aim was that in this diversity of representation, people could identify and recognize at least a part of their identity, whether that be as a mother or father, someone who had fallen in or out of love, as a migrant, as an asylum seeker, or a non-English speaker. And the results spoke for themselves. We saw a 21% increase in visitation during this period. This is an ongoing evolution, and in order to enable greater access, participation, and engagement, we work continuously to break down these barriers. There's a lot more work ahead to shift the balance and to make our spaces truly welcoming for all. I commend the work and the values behind this illuminating report, and thank you again for having me share our experience.
Thank you so much, Rohini, for sharing also the work that you're doing at the museum, and also kind of talking about the fact that it's work that's ongoing, that there's always continuous improvement in this work, that you don't kind of get to an end point where you've achieved equity forever. Like things are constantly evolving and changing, and you always need to be working on it. I loved your example of for, of, and by. Of, by, for. Okay, I have to look that one up, but that was really good. So basically making sure that things are self-determined as much as possible and embedding that into the way that museums and galleries work. And also that you did mention something that's really important, that there's a massive gap between the rhetoric and the actual reality. Quite often the rhetoric is great around diversity, and the actions are not always matching that. So thank you for that. I wonder if Gemma is here. Gemma? Oh, hello. So I wanted to now introduce Gemma Mahadeo. Gemma is a multilingual writer and performer who came to Australia in 1987. She's published, her published writing includes poetry and criticism in Archer, Australian Poetry Journal, Cordite, Diged Press, Peril Magazine, Rabbit, The Suburban Review and The Victorian Writer. Gemma is currently reviews editors for the Melbourne Spoken Word website and poetry editor for Concrete Queers Zine. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. I'd just like to acknowledge that we are gathered here on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and as a child of migrants and being inherently complicit in invasion violence, I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. This is stolen land. So I'm going to give more personal context to the report, and basically introduce myself fully and explain how I identify as a culturally and linguistically diverse person. My name is Gemma Mahadeo. My mother was born in the Philippines, a former Spanish colony. Her first language is Tagalog, and she was raised Roman Catholic. Her second language is English, which she learnt in England. My father was born in Guyana, a former British colony and part of the Indo-Caribbean minority community. My South Asian Indian ancestors found themselves in Guyana due to indentured labour. His first language is West Indian English. He speaks British English and did know some Hindi as a child. I was born in London in 1979. My parents came from poor backgrounds, moving to England to become part of its working class before spending most of their lives to date in Australia as part of the middle class. I'm a writer, musician and aspiring disability activist. I have chronic mental health issues. I'm disabled according to the social model of disability. I'm a queer, non-binary intersectional feminist, a migrant of colour, which again, as I mentioned, this makes me complicit in the invasionary violence towards this land's First Nations people. I'm a permanent Australian resident and a British citizen, and my languages, in order of fluency, are English, French and Tagalog. Shifting the Balance begins to address long-held concerns regarding CALD artistic communities and their representation and participation both as consumers and as practitioners, but more specific considerations need to be acknowledged to continue the work that this report has started. CALD communities are not one conglomerate happy family. They too can be racist, sexist, ableist, homophobic, transphobic, discriminatory based on socioeconomic status and education levels required. The report details that CALD audiences and artist representation is very high. Migrants often say that working hard should be enough to excel. The arts as a professional pursuit means having to produce work that consistently excels in several criteria that I can't specify due to time concerns, but reductively put, mediocrity is only a luxury granted to our non-CALD counterparts. There are times when it is unsafe to publicly disclose certain aspects of one's heritage, identity, faith, practice, or health status. As a CALD, non-binary feminine-presenting person in a relationship with a white, bisexual cis male, I experience privilege navigating selected public spaces other CALD people may not have. Acknowledging our individual privileges is essential to avoid replicating exclusionary, elitist power structures that we've worked so hard to partially infiltrate out of sheer necessity and lack of alternatives. This partial conformity itself is problematic. Should we continue to set up organisations and initiatives that centre us appropriately and ethically? Examples, Liminal, Jed Press, Herald come to mind. For First Nations, I think of Magabala Books and the Yirramboi Festival, or work within established hierarchies that ideally look to exclude or other us, and to mollify their anxieties over adopting quotas that would see our general population's diversity more accurately represented. Not everybody will need the same level of culturally sensitive, tailored care. Refugees, migrants, and those born in Australia will require markedly different levels of support. This, with relevant industry education and mentorships, need to be more widespread if we want CALD creatives staying in their chosen fields and positions to more accurately encourage representation reflecting the percentage of the general population that identifies as CALD. It isn't enough to be offered opportunities allowing us to be creatives if there is no ongoing support to continue practicing after that initial entry point. Ideally, this should be available at every level of a creative's career, beginning, emerging, and established. Inclusion on the basis of one's diversity does not necessarily mean we are immediately considered worthy colleagues by the majority. Inclusion for diversity, despite its benefits to various artistic disciplines, does not mean inequality ceases to exist. More questions arise. Are performance venues and creative workspaces accessible to those with disabilities? How can we change this and remain mindful that disability discourse is still incredibly Anglo-focused? Can we implement quotas similar to those adopted in the UK successfully? How quickly, if we can? Where will resistance lie within the decision makers who can make this happen? Shifting the balance does not address First Nations representation, and I am not qualified to comment on that, so that's not out of respect for our First Nations people. For this reason, I'm not going to be reading my own creative work, but I instead wanted to relate an experience I had whilst growing up reading Growing Up Aboriginal in Australia, edited by Anita Heiss. If you haven't read it, please do. As someone who was subject to gatekeeping in the classical music field, the stories of opera singers Don Bemrose and Deborah Cheetham respectively made me fist pump the air and shout, "Fuck yeah." I recall thinking they've beaten them at their own game. It's like seeing all the former colonies' cricket teams kick England's arse major. What would not needing to beat the non-CALD majority at their own game look like within the broader arts landscape? What would it be like having a place freely offered at the table? Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for that, Gemma. I think just kind of talking about the diversity within diversity, and that it's not kind of one homogenous, culturally and linguistically diverse, and I think as people have already mentioned, that it's often very othering kind of term, and bringing in and talking about disability and the complexity of intersectionality and also First Nations people. We recognise that this research definitely is one step, and we need to do a lot more of this work, and also in other areas of diversity as well. I want to now introduce Surdo. Tim is the founder and National Director of Democracy in Colour, Australia's first racial and economic justice organisation led by people of colour. Previously, he was senior organiser at United Voice, where he helped low-paid workers start Hospo Voice, a new union in hospitality. And you can find out more about Tim and Gemma as well on our website. Their bios are there as well. I've just been told I have to keep my intro shorter, so...
Thanks folks for having me. Before I begin, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. We're on the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on stolen land and that sovereignty was never ceded. We're here today to challenge ourselves to build a creative space that's more reflective of the society we live in. And this report shows significant challenges and barriers to making that reality, to making that vision a reality. I imagine that for First Nations artists, representation is even more poorly defined in this space, and that's very important because this country has a very long history of appalling treatment, both historical and ongoing, of First Nations people. This country incarcerates the most Indigenous people in the world. There have been hundreds of black deaths in custody, more than 400 since there was a Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody that released its report in 1991. There's a second stolen generation happening right now. Indigenous kids are 10 times more likely to be taken into out-of-home care than non-Indigenous kids. And this is all relevant because the arts can be a powerful tool to speak truth to power. But when Indigenous voices are not represented in this space, when Indigenous leadership is shut out of this space, there is less incentive and less impetus for this space, for the arts to be used as a tool to speak truth to power for the many atrocities that this country is perpetrating towards First Nations people. So I just wanted to start off by acknowledging that. So everybody in this room knows the importance of the creative and art spaces, knows that this space is essential, right? And there are many powerful arguments you can make for why this space is essential. You can make the economic argument, right? The tourism that it brings in, the jobs that it creates. You can make the reputation argument that the arts is essential for building our global standing. But I think we know the importance of the arts because of something more elemental, because of how the arts can remind us of what it means to be human, our ingenuity, our imagination, our capacity to love. Our orchestras enrich the tapestries of our lives. Our theatre brings to the stage the complexities and contradictions of our lives. Our screens spark national conversations. Our museums are our national and collective memory. We know the importance of the arts because it's how we tell stories about ourselves. It's how we craft our personal and national identities. And so, if that's what the arts is, what does it mean when this report shows that more than half of our major cultural institutions have no people of colour in their leadership teams? If the arts are how we craft our identity, if the arts are how we celebrate our communities, if the arts are fundamentally how we define our humanity, what does it mean when this report reveals only 9% of the leaders of our major cultural institutions, the organisations responsible for curating the arts, for making the decisions about who is on our theatre stages, about who we see on our screens, about who's in our orchestras playing the instruments? What does it mean when 9% of the leaders of those organisations, only 9%, are people of colour? Or as Beverley said before, it's probably much less than that if we talk about, if we remove white cold folk from that report. I think it means that the story we tell about ourselves, right, our national identity, that story inevitably excludes some communities. It means that the national conversations that this space sparks, critical conversations, it means that those conversations don't speak to the lived reality of some of our communities. And fundamentally it means that some people who look to this space, as all people do, to see their humanity reflected back at them, to have their dignity affirmed. It means that those people don't see that in this space. And this is not an isolated issue. This is not some quirk of the creative space. Last year, as the Australian Human Rights Commission research showed, 95% of senior leaders in the political, in the business, in the academic space are white. This is a systematic problem. It's also not a new problem, right? You know, there's a contradiction. When I read this report, there was a contradiction. There's a contradiction in reading a shocking statistic that doesn't shock you. As other speakers have mentioned before, it is a shocking statistic that the fact that the majority of our major cultural institutions have no people of colour in their leadership. That is a shocking statistic. That is an indictment on this country, on this space. But I wasn't shocked when reading that. Angered, yes, but not shocked. And I'd say the vast majority of other people of colour who read that report would not be shocked either. And let's be honest, everybody in this room already knew there was a problem in this space, right? This problem didn't start this morning with the release of this report. The importance of this report is that it defines the extent of the report, that it provides a sense of the scale of the challenge that we're facing. But the problem itself is not new. People of colour artists have been talking about this for years, for decades. It's obvious, right? As other speakers have said again, every time you turn on the TV and you see a new show pushing tired stereotypes about our families, our communities, or pushing whitewashed histories about this country, it's obvious going out to the theatre and seeing, once again, an all-white cast. And so the question is, if we all know there's a problem, and if we've known there's a problem for a long time, the natural question then becomes, why hasn't anything been done about it? And some people say that we have done stuff about it, that there has been progress. And yes, there has been incremental progress, but power is cunning, and power is extraordinarily good at giving just enough to convince us that something is changing without actually changing anything substantive at all. And that is what's very dangerous about this space. That we see institutions change just enough to address our concerns without actually fundamentally shifting a status quo they have no interest in changing because it works very well for them. And when we talk about diversity, this issue, you know, people like to say it's about giving impacted communities a voice. But I think it's pretty clear people of colour in impacted communities already have a voice. That's not the problem. The problem is that that voice has been systematically silenced. And so my main point today is that this conversation is about power. And a function of oppression is to deny the press the space to tell their stories and to control the narrative. And impacted communities and people of colour, we're fundamentally experts of our own narrative and our own experience. So, what I hope, but it's certainly not inevitable, what I hope will come from this report is a conversation around what does a meaningful resource commitment to shifting existing power dynamics look like in this space. What does it mean to interrogate and confront how power holders in this space have benefited from those dynamics? And what I think this is, right, is fundamentally an opportunity. This report represents an opportunity to embody the tomorrow we're all fighting for in how our organisations operate today. But that's all it is, an opportunity, right? The ball's now in our court, and it would be an extraordinary shame, right? All of our time would be wasted. Every speaker that's just spoken today, their time would have been wasted. Your time would have been wasted today if this just remains a report. That's all it is, words and paper. We need to do something about this, right? We know there's a problem. We've known about the problem for a long time. This report starts to define the extent to that problem. There are people in this room who have the capacity, or who know people who have the capacity to change this. Do something about it. I implore you, please do something. Don't let this report be another soundbite, be something on social media, graphics are created. Don't let that be the extent to this. There's an opportunity here to ensure that this is a catalyst, to ensure that our organisations fundamentally embody the tomorrow we all know is possible in how we operate today. The ball's in our court. Let's seize it. Thanks, folks.
Thank you so much, Tim, for that really powerful talk that talked about power and the ways in which structures of power kind of work. And I love that what you said about giving us just enough to make it look like change is happening, but not actually committing to kind of long-term systemic change. And I think when Gemma was talking as well, she was talking earlier about how, not just putting people in places, but also how you're supporting them long-term. And I felt like there was a kind of connection. I would definitely vote for you, by the way. Who else would? Okay, and thank you as well for talking about the opportunity that this report presents and for us to not waste that opportunity. I now want to introduce Jackie Bailey. Jackie Bailey is one of our co-conspirators, collaborators on this report, co-editor and undertook the research via a BYP group of which she's the principal and also the founder. Jackie's had 18 years experience in the Australian government and non-profit sectors, and she's also a writer of creative fiction and non-fiction. Welcome, Jackie.
I also want to thank and acknowledge Aunty Diane and the elders of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, past, present and future, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Before I sort of add my comments to all of the incredible comments that we've heard so far, I just really want to get everybody to put their hands together for Lena Nalus and her team, because she's an any of you who work with Lena would know what a dynamo she is, and I keep saying, like, you are going to fall apart if you keep going at this rate, but apparently that's just how she rolls. So thank God for us, because otherwise we wouldn't have this report and we wouldn't have all the incredible stuff that Darts does. So thank you, Lena, and your team. I also want to thank the research team that I worked with. So I want to thank my husband, Hung Yen Yang. I want to thank our key analyst, Jose Ignacio Galarza. I want to thank Tian Zhang, Adam Rothwell, Anne-Louise Rentel, Ali Henshin, Farinda Koch and Monique Choi, who were all researchers on this project. So you can see how many people had to be involved in looking at 200 organisations, 1,980 leaders, and try and work out if they were counted or not, and ask organisations if they were counted or not. So there's a lot of people, a lot of time, a lot of hours and spreadsheets involved in this project. So today's been a big day for the R word research. No, that's the one that you're all thinking of. And it's also been a big day for the R word racism. I was sitting there listening to all the speeches and thinking about a couple of experiences that I've had as well as a writer in the last couple of years and as an art professional, how as soon as you stick your head above the parapet in this space, you get shot down. And so it's really great to have a report like this to back you up and sort of be your armour, I suppose, or be your secret weapon, be your crossbow. I could get into military metaphors here. I watch Game of Thrones, but I'll just pull back from the edge. So it's just so nice to have this opportunity to be among people who are on my side in this conversation and who want to see change. So thank you all for being here and being part of this conversation and being part of change. I recently submitted a work for my PhD in creative writing, and one of my examiners, basically I had to revise and resubmit, and the commentary was around how the work did not represent intergenerational trauma as I had represented it, because it was looking at the experience of Chinese diaspora, and, blew my mind. So obviously in response, it made them feel very uncomfortable and claustrophobic. So in response, I had to say, so you're telling me that the experience of Singaporeans under World War II occupation and, fleeing the purges in Shanghai doesn't represent intergenerational trauma, so what lens are we using here? And I had to say, I don't want you to feel comfortable when you read my work. The aim is for someone like you to feel productively uncomfortable. And when I say someone like you, I mean someone who wouldn't consider themselves racist, but who may not be completely across all of the facts of other people's lives. I want the anonymous examiner to feel uncomfortable, productively uncomfortable. It's all very anonymous. And if she did feel comfortable with my work, I would have been misrepresenting my story and my family's story. So I see a few people nodding here, and you know what I mean. The point is, I want people like me to identify with that work and feel like they're having an experience of homecoming and identification. I want people who don't identify with it to feel a sense of universality, but I do want them to feel uncomfortable. And if you're feeling a little uncomfortable, that's okay, because like Clementine Ford says, it's actually important to take up that position of discomfort, because that's where change can happen. And that's where all the cool ideas come from. When you're feeling uncomfortable but you don't walk away from it, you stay in that space and you just push it out a bit further and just see what can be done. I don't know about you, if you've read White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. It's a really good book. It's short, which is awesome, and it's also really on point. So if you haven't read it, just a very thumbnail sketch of what she says. She provides this framework for understanding racism that other R, that's been having a good day today in conversation, in societies like ours. She explains that racist isn't just a label for neo-Nazis or anti-immigration campaigners. She explains that a person is racist if she benefits from her whiteness and does not do anything to rectify this. So I would definitely say that I am probably every day of my life in some way racist as a result of that. I'm Eurasian, I'm half white, half Chinese. As soon as I married a Chinese Australian, my Chinese quotient seemed to go straight through the roof. Anyway, that's a different conversation. But what I find is that challenged me to think about, well, what am I doing for example, First Nations Australians and other people who are less privileged than me, who don't perhaps have English as a first language. So we're thinking about that in our personal lives at home and in our work lives and what we can do. And we're looking at a couple of different things. But by mentioning that, I just wanted to bring that up, because if you're benefiting from privilege in any way, you're not a bad person, but you are complicit and you are obligated to do something about it. And essentially that's what this report calls for. It calls for action. Now quite often, again, I don't know about you guys, but quite often in the conversation about the environment, I often feel like, well, what can I do? I know I'm complicit in that, but what can I do about it? And thank God there's a whole raft of people who know way more than me who are telling me what I can do about it. That I can buy green power and I can do all sorts of carbon neutralising things and I can recycle. And that's essentially what this report does in this space. It tells you what you can do about it. So if you think about power, which a few people have talked about today, and you think about the way that power has shifted in history, really the only way that power has ever really substantially shifted, this is my Bill Bryson's history of everything moment, but the way that history actually has shifted is if people have taken it, think like French Revolution kind of thing, if people have created new sources of power, like microfinance, that kind of example, and when people have given it away, when people have shared it. Now that's rare, and that's what we're asking of you today. We're asking people to give away power, which is a big ask, and it's an incremental thing, and it's very threatening, it's very uncomfortable, and that's what makes it so exciting. I just want to quickly mention before I wrap up, my key takeaway from doing all of this research, apart from the wonders of Excel pivot tables, was the successfulness of targets in this space, or specifically in the gender equity space. So the screen agencies have shown how incredibly useful and what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, how great targets are. So what they did, you guys might already know this, but what they did is in 2015, Screen Australia began introducing gender equity targets. And they put their money where their mouth was as well, essentially. They put money into supporting the achievement of these targets. And in some instances, they linked mainstream funding criteria with gender equity targets. So, you know, after 100 years of the screen industry kind of existing, and in those years, 100 years of gender disparity, it took these Australian screen agencies less than 3 years to achieve gender equity if you look at the key creative roles as a whole on agency-funded productions. Now, there's still a way to go in specific key creative roles, like directors and writers particularly, especially on feature films. But, I mean, I just think it's worth pausing for a moment and just taking that on board. Like, that's a massive historical achievement. And, I mean, I might be getting the nuance of it wrong here, but overall, the gender equity of the screen industry has changed. It's completely changed in 3 years. There's heaps more work to be done, but if you think about the success of targets in that context, I'd like us to sort of think about the potential for targets in this context. I mean, the data is fairly unequivocal. Efforts, one-off efforts, support programs, professional development, you know, that's all great, but it hasn't been enough. There were special initiatives for women as well before 2015. There were loads of them. You might have participated in some of them, I did. But it wasn't until the introduction of targets that there was real change in gender equity. So we all need accountability aids. Like, I have my daily word count sort of target as a writer. My daughter, my 8-year-old daughter, she has a points chart on the wall. You know, do your chores, get points. Businesses have KPIs. Targets are a way to make funders accountable. And as our screen agencies have shown, they're also spectacularly effective. So what I'd like to know now is, I mean, I know what the data says. I know really, really intimately what the data says. What I'd really like to know now is what we're all going to do about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for that call to action. I need to ask people who is sitting. Sorry, Margaret, you said people are blocking the wheelchair access. Okay, if you could just move to a little bit over. So thank you, Jackie, for talking about the 2 R's, research and racism, and also, talking about people feeling productively uncomfortable. I love that term. And yes, the film industry is a really good example, and we agree that there should be targets. It's a strong recommendation in the report. And a lot of people say, you know, targets and quotas, they encourage mediocrity. Some people argue that that might already be the case, and in fact there are kind of silent targets that are already set up that we don't know about. So, that's harsh. Anyway, so now, that was really exciting. I want to introduce the wonderful Jane Crawley to also talk a little bit about the report in the context of the Fair Play project and the initiatives that Creative Victoria are doing in the diversity and inclusion space. And I've got to say that looking around Australia, no one else is doing these initiatives. Jane is also going to introduce the first 10 organisations who will be in year 1 of the Fair Play project. And she's representing today Martin Foley, the Minister for the Creative Industries. Jane Crawley is the Director of Arts Investment at Creative Victoria. Her portfolio leads strategy, funding and investment for Victoria's non-government arts and creative industries sector, and leads Creative Victoria's engagement with and support of Victorian First People, Regional Victoria, contemporary live music and education, and a longer bio on the website. So welcome, Jane.
Thanks, Lena.
acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri. I acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. I pay my respects to the owners of this land and to all the elders, past, present and emerging. I pay my respects to Aunty Diane for her welcome, and I pay my particular respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here with us today. Thank you. Thanks very much, Lena, thanks Darts, and thank you to the extraordinary people who have spoken to this report. It's right and fitting that I'm here. I am a gatekeeper. I am a quite powerful gatekeeper in Victoria, and to Gemma's point that she made earlier, I do really agree. I actually think there is a personal onus on us to understand and sort of acknowledge the power that we have, and to be mindful and conscious about how we deploy it or how we don't. And not just people who work in the bureaucracy, not just people who work in the government, but really anyone who is working in an organisational context or whatever kind of context where you have the capacity to welcome or to not welcome, support or not support, reflect or not reflect, and that's probably pretty much most of us in the room today. It is a really important thing to do. I think there's, you could talk for a very long time about the creative industries and why they are so extraordinarily conservative, and why they are so incredibly privileged and monocultural. But I mean, the most obvious thing is it's not an easy set of industries to work in. It's not well paid, it's not very secure, the route for getting there is quite circuitous, it's hard to have the help. It is a set of industries that is probably easier for a more privileged cohort of people to occupy, and I think we need to acknowledge that too. So there are systemic issues all over the place, and I won't ramble on, it's not the time and place. I am representing Martin Foley, who's the Minister for the Creative Industries in Victoria. For those who, have got any familiarity with him, you'll know he is vocal and passionate about change and about equity, and came to the portfolio 4 years ago with a commitment to kind of redress imbalance and to see some change. The vehicle for doing that was really a mass kind of engagement with community that set a frame for the first 4 years, and that's Creative State. Many of you will be familiar with that. It sounds kind of bureaucratic and not important, but actually it's really critical, because those sorts of framings like Creative State, they're linked to money and budget, and they're the platform to intervene and to start addressing systemic issues. So part of what I'm here to talk about very briefly today, the Fair Play project, sort of came out of that first iteration of Creative State. Many of the speakers who have gone before me have talked about, the approach to change, and I think not to pitch Creative Victoria or to say that we're some kind of nirvana, because we're not. We accept that this is a long and complex road. But the interventions that have been taken are really seeking to combine a mixture of strategy, capacity building, direct intervention in things like boards, ministerial board appointments, dedicated sort of investment programs, if you like, and opening the place up and sort of listening. So there's, you need an ongoing multiplicity of strategies, so to speak, to really sort of get things going. And fair play is one of those things. So the last few years has sort of seen Creative Victoria, for example, with the First Peoples around a dedicated sort of action plan for the creative industries. Things like setting up a partnership group with First Nations that literally guides the whole of Creative Victoria, not just in the First Nations space, but in everything that it does, everything that it designs, every program that it delivers. Our partnership with Darts Arts, our partnership with Arts Access Victoria. There's a whole bunch of things going on, but we acknowledge that much more is needed. Obviously, government plays a really critical role in this space. Tim alluded to it, Gemma alluded to it, so did Beverley. Particularly in the creative industries, which rely to a significant degree on public investment, on public funding. Clearly the government, sets the tone in this space around the conditions for equity. It has the capacity to leave things the way that they are, make them different, etc. So I think, from a Victoria perspective, there is an individual onus on us, but there is also a governmental onus on us to look at and be conscious of the role of government in this space. I hope you kind of hear that mic's just sort of going in and out a little bit. What else did I want to say? I don't really want to talk too much about a whole bunch of initiatives. It doesn't really set the right place. I guess I'll talk a little bit about the Fair Play project, but before I do, I would like to remind everyone in the room today that we are in the process of developing the strategy and the associated funding commitments for the next 4 years. And I hope that you are aware that there is a big process happening at the moment across Victoria. And also online, and I would really encourage everyone who is here today to actually be mindful of that opportunity and to input into that process, whether it's a 10-word statement online, whether it's participating in one of these sessions, whether it's putting in a formal submission. It's absolutely critical. But the thing I can sort of share with you is that thus far through that process, the two things that are really absolutely significant and shared by everyone, no matter where they are in Victoria, is around absolutely wanting to see government reflect First Peoples and see these industries, the creative industries, shift in that space very significantly, and more broadly, tangible commitment to equity and how we're actually in the long term and very systemically going to address that. So my feeling is that there is a lot going on in Victoria. There has been over the last few years. Oh my God! And but there is a lot more to come, and we really do. We should need to partner with you. So the Fair Play project is one element that we have been working with Darts on. It's a capacity building element. It targets those organisations that are in receipt of funding from Creative Victoria, whether it's state-owned cultural agencies or organisations that are being funded through a regional program or through our organisation's investment program. This is a 2-year sort of embedded process. This is really looking at everything from HR, recruitment, staffing, governance, board, what is the baseline and how to actually drive some really tangible change, how to have succession, how to shift power. So these organisations, and there's 10 of them, and there'll be another 10 in the next stage, are working very closely with Darts on quite a embedded and complex capacity building and change process. And I think I need to wind up, yes. And so, Lena, would you like me to?
Yes.
Yeah. Right, okay. So I do want to thank these organisations, and I want to congratulate these organisations on putting themselves forward and being open to this and being very excited partners in this. And they are the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, Bendigo Art Gallery, the Emerging Writers Festival, Melbourne International Arts Festival, Music Victoria, Regional Arts Victoria, the Wheeler Centre, Theatre Network Australia, and Warrnambool Art Gallery. And please join me in congratulating those guys. the speakers who are absolutely extraordinary, and it's been a privilege to be here to hear you all. I want to congratulate everyone who's involved in Fair Play. I want to congratulate Dart. I mean, we live in a country that has got the oldest continuous living culture, and we are made up, every single one of us who is not First Peoples comes from somewhere else. We come from around the globe. We come from all cultures. It is absolutely incumbent on all of us to ensure that everyone, regardless, has access to the industries, to careers, to experiences, to making art. And we have an absolute responsibility to make sure that people do see themselves and that their voices are heard. So for me, it's around personal accountability meets strategic accountability, and how we co-work together, and how we stay tangible, how we keep to a roadmap to get there, to get to a better place, and to really see some absolute real change. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jane, for that really kind of honest and thoughtful reflection, and particularly about the critical role that government also plays in this space in terms of setting agendas, and you made many good points. And for also announcing the exciting year one of the Fair Play project. I wanted to also thank everyone, and also let you know that afterwards we have a masterclass in how to diversify, in actually how to diversify your arts leadership. But it's packed to capacity. So if you are interested, we can take your name down and put you on a waiting list, because we might run it again, because there's been quite a bit of interest. I wanted to, so with all of these things, we're also trying to tie them to really kind of practical ways. So, like what can we tangibly do, to kind of, I guess, support people to make these changes, and these kinds of masterclasses are one way. I wanted to thank Aunty Diane Kerr. I wanted to thank Beverley Wang, Rohini Kappadath, Gemma Mahadeo, Surdo, Jackie Bailey and Jane Crawley for being such fantastic speakers. Thank you so much. I just felt that those reflections were all really, really different, and there was just so much depth to them that I know that it's going to take me a few days to kind of meditate on all of the words that I've heard today. I wanted to also thank our Auslan interpreter, Neil Phipps. I said it right. To our wonderful citizen journalist, Hua Pham, and CB Mako, who's there, and is going to come and take some photos of you in the break time. And to our team at Darts, Maylee Hunt, Glyza Perez, who's moderating the live stream. Hi, live stream people. Margaret Mayhew, who contributed significantly to the report as well. Mahla Karamian, Yubi Lee, Monique Choi, Sonia Merman, Rebecca Conroy, and Joanne Cooper. Thank you also to Dr. Paula Aboud, who will be running the masterclass shortly. And to, of course, the Australian National Commission for UNESCO, who had supported this research. And even though it was a modest amount of funding, they said, I kind of have a feeling that you'll make it happen. And we were able to leverage that funding to get in-kind support. Thank you to Western Sydney University and BYP Group, our report partners, and also to our venue partner, the Convent. So please stick around, have lunch, network, let's talk about the discussions that have been had on stage, the talks that have been given, stick around. So that's the end.